Arnold Schwarzenegger dedicated his entire youth to bodybuilding. He crossed an ocean for it, built a Hollywood career on the back of it, and spent decades working to bring the sport to a wider audience. Now that same man is standing in front of audiences, looking at the sport he helped shape, and describing it as one of the most dangerous things in the world of athletics. What he has been saying, steadily, plainly, and with increasing urgency, is something the bodybuilding world has spent years unwilling to acknowledge. This is not a story about nostalgia, nor is it the complaint of someone who believes things were simply better in the past. It is the story of a sport that lost its bearing, pushed further and further into extremes, and began paying for that with human lives. What follows is an account of what Schwarzenegger sees when he looks at professional bodybuilding today, and why, after everything he contributed to it, that picture troubles him. To understand why Schwarzenegger's words carry weight, it is necessary to go back to the beginning, not to the polished public figure, but to the teenager in Thal, Austria, who had little more than ambition and access to a barbell. Schwarzenegger did not grow up in comfortable circumstances. He was raised in a small village outside Graz, in a house without running hot water, by a father who regarded his son's obsession with physical training as a passing phase. That changed when Arnold encountered photographs of Reg Park, a British bodybuilder who had built a career playing Hercules on screen. Park represented something specific to him: physical capability, international recognition, and a life constructed entirely on one's own effort. By the age of 20, Schwarzenegger had won the amateur Mr. Universe title, becoming the youngest person to do so at that point. By 23, he was living in California, training at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach under Joe Gold, and developing a physique that was unlike what the sport had previously produced. He carried the mass of a super heavyweight competitor, alongside the proportions of a much lighter man. Wide shoulders narrowing into a trim waist, a chest that drew immediate attention, and arms that would become among the most recognized in the sport's history. He won the Mr. Olympia title 6 consecutive times between 1970 and 1975, then retired. He returned in 1980 under circumstances that remain debated, and won once more 7 Olympia titles in total, a record that held at the top of the sport for years. What extended his influence beyond competition, however, was a single film, Pumping Iron. Released in 1977, did not simply document bodybuilding, it made the sport accessible, and for many people appealing. Gyms that had previously operated on the margins of popular culture became places people wanted to be. Fitness clothing became mainstream. Millions of people who had never trained with weights began to do so. Schwarzenegger has stated that more than 200,000 people attend the Arnold Sports Festival annually, a direct measure of the mainstream interest his career helped generate. The physique he built in Venice Beach became a reference point not just in the United States but internationally, for what physical conditioning could look like. The standard that physique represented was always grounded in the same principles: proportion and aesthetics. The idea that a bodybuilder's physique should be something that looked balanced, structured, visually coherent, and recognizably human. Arnold didn't arrive at his criticism of modern bodybuilding overnight. His frustration accumulated over years, expressed first in speeches, then in magazine interviews, and with growing directness as the news coming out of the sport grew increasingly grim. By the time the IFBB created the classic physique division, Schwarzenegger had been publicly criticizing contemporary bodybuilding physiques for years. The creation of that division was a direct response to the gap his criticism had identified. When a sport establishes an entirely new competitive category because a single voice of dissent proves too persistent to dismiss, it reflects something genuinely wrong at the sport's core. His central complaint was straightforward. The competitors of the 1970s, massive but proportional, muscular but still recognizably human, bore little resemblance to what appeared on stage by the 1990s and beyond. What had once looked athletic and balanced had in the eyes of many observers become grotesque and disproportionate, but his concern extended well past aesthetics. In a 2023 Men's Health interview, Schwarzenegger acknowledged using Dianabol and testosterone under medical supervision during his competitive years, while drawing a clear distinction between that era and current drug use in the sport. Bodybuilding always was considered a safe sport, he said. But now it's not. Now people are dying. They're dying because of overdoses of drugs, and they don't know what the F they're doing. He said this not in private, but to one of the most widely read men's health publications in the world. He also criticized what he called charlatans, individuals feeding young bodybuilders misinformation, and urged serious athletes to seek legitimate medical guidance rather than pursue dangerous shortcuts. The word charlatan is a deliberate one. It does not describe someone who errs through ignorance. It describes someone causing harm knowingly. Schwarzenegger was naming a culture that had taken root in the sport. Coaches and online influencers who push extreme protocols on young athletes, profit from the results, and are absent when consequences follow. Among his specific targets was the men's open division, which he believes has shifted too far toward mass at the expense of aesthetics. He was direct about where he believed the sport's original spirit had survived. The 7-time Mr. Olympia was stating plainly that the sport's most prestigious title had drifted far enough from its founding principles that it no longer represented what bodybuilding was originally built around. The transformation between Schwarzenegger's era and the modern competitive landscape cannot be reduced to a simple increase in steroid use. The shift was more complex and considerably more dangerous. In the 1970s and 1980s, competitors like Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu trained around the classic V-shape, broad shoulders, and narrow waist. The pharmacology of that era leaned primarily on anabolic steroids such as Dianabol, with minimal use of insulin or human growth hormone. By the 1990s and early 2000s, both insulin and HGH use had increased substantially among competitors. It was during this period that what the bodybuilding community refers to as HGH gut became a visible feature on competitive stages, fundamentally altering the sport's appearance. This is the condition Schwarzenegger has spoken about with evident contempt, known colloquially as bubble gut, and clinically associated with a condition called Palumboism. He has linked the excessive use of growth hormone by modern bodybuilders directly to early deaths within the sport. The condition does not stem from growth hormone alone. High-dose insulin use, chronic overeating, and extreme contest preparation strategies are the more significant contributing factors. Insulin abuse combined with HGH can lead to dangerous organ enlargement, particularly in the liver and intestines, producing the appearance of a rounded, bloated midsection despite very low body fat levels. Insulin, unlike anabolic steroids, does not require a prescription in many jurisdictions. It is a hormone used by diabetics to regulate blood sugar. When injected in large quantities by competitive bodybuilders to drive nutrients into muscle tissue, and combined with HGH and other compounds, its effects on the body are entirely different. Organ enlargement, cardiovascular stress, and cumulative internal damage that develops without obvious early warning signs. Modern competitors carry 30 to 40 additional pounds of dense muscle, with a level of conditioning that was not achievable in Schwarzenegger's era. Performance enhancement has advanced considerably since then, and the associated health risks have advanced alongside it. Physiques have grown larger with each passing cycle of competition. Use has intensified in parallel. The distance between what the human body is designed to sustain and what competitive bodybuilding now requires of it has continued to widen. Schwarzenegger watched this progression unfold over decades. For much of that time, the sport declined to look back. In 2025 alone, more than 56 bodybuilders lost their lives. The majority died from heart-related complications, raising urgent questions about what is happening behind the scenes in competitive bodybuilding. This is not just about steroids. It is about contaminated injections, extreme protocols, and athletes willing to risk everything for stage-ready condition. 56 people in 1 year. The average age was 35. A landmark study published in the 2025 edition of the European Heart Journal analyzed over 20,000 male athletes who competed in IFBB events between 2005 and 2020, tracking them for an average of more than 8 years. During that period, 121 deaths were identified. The most common cause was sudden cardiac death, accounting for 38% of all fatalities. Professional bodybuilders had a markedly higher risk of sudden cardiac death compared to amateur bodybuilders, a hazard ratio of 5.23, meaning professionals face roughly 5 times the risk, not 50% more, 5 times. The athletes at the very top of the sport, competing on the biggest stages, carrying the largest physiques, pursuing the highest titles, were dying at a rate that researchers described as a genuine public health crisis. Autopsies showed cardiomegaly, enlarged hearts, and ventricular hypertrophy, meaning dangerously thickened heart walls. These were not the large but healthy hearts seen in endurance athletes. These were pathological changes, signs of a heart under chronic severe stress. Toxicology reports confirmed anabolic androgenic steroid use. The study authors directly linked the abuse of performance-enhancing to an increased risk of sudden cardiac death. Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a bystander in this story. He used performance-enhancing during his competitive career, built that career within the culture those drugs helped create, and has continued to be associated with the bodybuilding world even as he has spoken critically of its current direction. When asked about his steroid use by ABC News, Schwarzenegger said he had no regrets. At that time, it was something new that came on the market, and we went to the doctor and did it under doctor's supervision. We were experimenting with it. It was a new thing. He added, "Of course we want to keep the sport clean. It says bodybuilding, not body destroying. It's bodybuilding." That phrase has become widely cited. It also carries a complicated weight coming from someone who was not a natural athlete, who built his public identity within a sport defined by PED use, and who has had 4 heart surgeries in 1997, 2018, 2020, and 24, and currently has a pacemaker. The argument that decades of steroid use carries consequences regardless of dose level is one that many people make, and Schwarzenegger does not dismiss it entirely. What he does insist on is a distinction between his era, controlled doses, medical oversight, a sport still defining its own limits, and what competitive bodybuilding has become, an environment with no floor, no meaningful oversight, and no accountability. He has said directly on the record, "In MMA fighters, you've had 4 guys die in the last 10 years. In bodybuilding, you've had 14 guys die over the last 10 years. So it just shows you how dangerous it is to take some of those medications and things that those guys take. He called bodybuilding the most dangerous sport in the world. From almost anyone else in the public eye, that might read as hyperbole. Coming from the man who spent a decade at the top of that sport, it carries a different weight. The introduction of the classic physique division represented a meaningful shift in how the IFBB structured competition. The category was designed to give athletes an alternative to the extreme mass of the men's open, a division where weight limits were imposed and physiques more closely resembling the proportional builds of bodybuilding's earlier decades were rewarded rather than penalized. Arnold responded positively when the division gained traction. "I was not only impressed, I was delighted to see a great performance when it comes to posing and the way they relax their faces," he said. "It looks so much more appealing. I think this is the direction we need to go, no two ways about it." But Arnold went further than simply endorsing the division. He argued that its existence as a separate category is itself an indication of how far the men's open has drifted from its original criteria. In his view, classic physique should not function as an alternative division for fans of an older aesthetic. It should be the standard. It should be Mr. Olympia. The question that remains is whether the division's growth is sufficient to change the sport's direction. Men's Open remains the centerpiece of the sport's most prestigious events. It draws the largest prize money and the most extensive media coverage. The athletes competing in it continue operating under the same conditions: extreme drug protocols, early deaths, and the consequences those carry for their families. Classic physique is expanding, but the Open has not contracted around it. Arnold Schwarzenegger has been calling for drug testing in bodybuilding for years. At the 2019 Arnold Sports Festival Africa, he addressed the issue directly and made his position clear. The difficulty is that the organizations running the most influential American bodybuilding events, specifically the NPC and its professional arm, have operated without meaningful drug testing for the better part of 3 decades. Drug testing in bodybuilding has a troubled history. The Arnold Classic became the first elite bodybuilding contest to incorporate testing in 1990, and the results were problematic. Competitors were tested before the show, but results took weeks to arrive. Several high-profile athletes, including former Mr. Olympia Samir Bannout and 1990 Arnold Classic champion Shawn Ray, failed those tests. The show has not tested athletes since. That experiment's failure had lasting consequences. In the absence of effective testing, the use of performance-enhancing drugs intensified. Without a meaningful deterrent, athletes had every incentive to increase dosages, combine more compounds, and pursue whatever gave them an advantage on competition day. WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, has declared the IFBB non-compliant, a designation that effectively separates the sport from the Olympic movement it once sought to join. Ben Weider spent decades pursuing Olympic inclusion for bodybuilding. By almost every measure, that goal has not been achieved, not because bodybuilders lack athletic merit, but because the sport has become structurally unable to meet the anti-doping standards Olympic participation requires. Schwarzenegger occupies a contradictory position. He runs the Arnold Sports Festival, portions of which are affiliated with WADA-compliant organizations, and portions of which are not. He profits from the sport he criticizes. He advocates for drug testing while lending his name to events where testing is absent. Some in the bodybuilding community point to this contradiction and argue that his statements lack credibility without consistent action. There is another way to interpret his position. Schwarzenegger is not an outside critic. He is someone embedded in the sport's institutions, working to change them from within. He created the classic physique division as an alternative model. He has spoken publicly about athlete deaths. He has criticized the IFBB's approach to posing. He has praised competitors who avoid extreme protocols. By his own conduct and statements, he appears genuinely concerned about the direction the sport has taken since his competitive years. His challenge to the sport has remained consistent. Of course we want to keep the sport clean. It says bodybuilding, not body destroying. But intent has not translated into enforcement. Bodybuilding has demonstrated repeatedly that wanting clean competition and having the institutional will to ensure it are two different things. This is where the sport currently stands. On one side, a competitive culture defined by extremity, physiques of remarkable size, conditioning, and physical improbability. Athletes who have pushed human biology beyond what would have seemed possible 30 years ago. A global community of fans, athletes, coaches, and businesses built around that extreme. On the other side, a growing number of deaths. A medical literature documenting in peer-reviewed terms that practices central to professional bodybuilding are causing serious harm. A legendary champion describing his own sport as the most dangerous in the world. A generation of young athletes entering the sport with knowledge of the physiques but not of the health consequences. Among the 56 deaths recorded in 2025, a pattern holds. Athletes who pursued pro cards, Olympia stages, social media recognition, coaching clients, and sponsorship deals. The outcomes for their families speak for themselves. Schwarzenegger has not stated it in those terms. But he has been approaching that conclusion for years, through discussions of aesthetics, proportion, posing, and what competitive bodybuilding was intended to be versus what it has become. His concern has grown more acute because those dying are not veterans at the end of long careers. They are athletes in their mid-20s. Researchers have framed the issue in clinical terms. The research challenges the idea that appearance alone is an indicator of health, and highlights the hidden risks that can exist behind even the most sculpted physiques. That observation is significant because the foundational premise of professional bodybuilding is that the body itself is evidence of effort, of commitment, of discipline. What the medical literature is now showing, and what autopsy findings are confirming, is that the most extreme physiques in the sport's history are sometimes the product of severe internal damage. The sport is not beyond correction. Classic physique demonstrates that athletes can be competitive and compelling without the protocols that carry the highest health risks. Demand for drug testing exists within the sport. It requires institutional will to act on it. A coaching culture that profits from dangerous practices can be changed if accountability structures are put in place. None of this is outside the realm of possibility. The pace of change, however, has not matched the pace of harm. The consequences are not falling on federation leadership, coaches with large social media followings, or supplement companies. They are falling on athletes, on competitors in their 20s with enlarged hearts and aspirations they did not live to fulfill. On families reading death notices that begin with unexpected and end with cardiac arrest. Schwarzenegger built his career demonstrating what the human body can achieve. What he has been saying with increasing directness is that the extreme and the sustainable are not the same thing. That the purpose of bodybuilding was never to push the body to the point of irreversible damage. That the original ambition of the sport was to present the human form at its most developed and proportional, not at its most medically compromised. Until the sport returns to that standard, until it seriously reconsiders what kind of body it is actually asking athletes to build, it will continue to lose people whose deaths were preventable. The question is whether those in positions of authority are still attentive to what the man who built the sport's most prominent stage has been saying. He has been saying it for a long time. A substantive response has not come.